Hi, everyone. Welcome. We are excited to have you all join us today for this discussion. So today we're going to be talking about cross-functional collaboration in the biopharma space, particularly between accounting finance teams and ClinOps teams, ClinOps folks, and all of those teams working together. So we're excited to bring this topic to you today. And I guess we'll just start out by introducing ourselves and kind of tee up the conversation. So to introduce myself, Kristen Lueck, this is Maddie on the phone. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with us and with what we do, we work for a company called Auxilius. Auxilius is a clinical trial finance and accounting platform that helps biotech and pharma manage their clinical trial budgets, removing a lot of the hassle with kind of understanding the financial implications of the clinical side. And of course, one of those big hassles is the collaboration between ClinOps, finance, and accounting, as you probably have all experienced in your own organizations. Definitely one of the big challenges that we really hope to help reduce with Auxilius. So we have a lot of experience helping ClinOps and accounting collaborate to manage a trial, coming from their respective roles, what they can bring to the table, and learn from each other and collaborate, given there's so much work that needs to happen together on each of these studies. So we're excited today to share some of the lessons and learnings we have from our time of working with these organizations together. So just to start out with quick introductions, more specifically, my name is Kristen Lueck. I head up our customer operations team, which essentially means my team is responsible for implementing all of our customers within the Auxilius system, getting all of your data from your existing process into the Auxilius software, and then also supporting with ongoing engagements, really helping support all of our customers throughout the life cycle of your engagement with Auxilius. My background is a little bit varied. I have a background in epidemiology and then also just working with healthcare SaaS throughout my career. And specifically, I've been with Auxilius for about 3 years at this point. Really started when we had maybe about 2 or 3 customers about 3 years ago. We've since onboarded over 60 customers, kind of spreading from all the way from small biotechs, very small startups, medium-sized biotechs, all the way to large pharma. So definitely excited to bring to you some anecdotes across all of those customers as we connect today. Maddie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Maddie. I am one of the directors of technical accounting success at Auxilius. I support customers from the second they sign the contract, their implementation through steady state of the engagement. And a little background about me as well is I started my career off at PwC in the healthcare group as an auditor. And then from there, worked a couple different healthcare SaaS companies. And as Kristen was saying, I work with a variety of customers, engaging with multiple different stakeholders at each. So I've kind of seen live the different setups of cross-functional teams and how they engage with each other, as well as anecdotes from my customers, and excited to share those with you today.
Awesome. So I think we want to jump in and talk a little bit about what we're going to discuss today, just a few agenda points. First thing, really unpacking why is that collaboration so hard between accounting, finance, and ClinOps? What makes this so challenging across all of those different organization sizes that I just mentioned? Want to share some examples of what we've seen other folks in the space doing so that you can use that to help define best processes, best practice on your end. And then also better understanding how Auxilius can be useful in this area, what we've seen work, how we've seen different sponsors use the Auxilius system to help facilitate that communication across teams. As we go through, please put any questions you have in the chat. We, of course, have a lot of exciting material to talk through, but we'd love to address specific questions that you have throughout. So comments, chats, all welcome, and we'll be happy to address them. But I think the first thing that we had wanted to start out with today was a poll. So would love to start out by understanding from you all, what is the biggest challenge you see when it comes to collaboration between finance, accounting, and ClinOps? And we'll give you a moment to answer the questions. You can see it up on the screen.
Give everyone a little bit of time to think about it. And I know there might be multiple that are true, but just select kind of the most annoying pain point that comes to mind?
Seeing actually a range of answers here.
Okay, it seems like matching trial information to dollars is leading currently. It's definitely not surprising.
Also seeing quite a bit of consistently getting time with ClinOps. We hear that quite a bit. Just everyone is so busy and has a lot of different things that need to happen for these trials to actually run. So to get ClinOps to support with some of the financial elements can be quite tricky. Yep. Seeing Sherry's and Chris's comments in the chat, totally agree.
Yeah, and we'll see coming in the next slides that is consistent across what we've seen as well. But before we dive in there, taking a step back and thinking about why do we need to have these conversations in the first place? So 2 main points called out here is first, understanding what happened in the study. So that's from the accounting perspective, thinking about across all of your trials, all of your vendors within your trials, what's the work performed to date compared to the invoices that have been paid, and then getting to those resulting accrual and prepaid balances. And so then part 2 of that is then understanding what we're expecting to happen. So thinking about forecasting and budgeting, it's almost guaranteed for trials to change, especially around timelines. So thinking about those changes, what's the impact then on those upcoming expenses? What can you expect for the next few months, the next year, or through the end of your trial? And some of those main talking points during those discussions will be, what are the number of patients either enrolled to date or upcoming? Are there any changes in those expectations to enrollment? Are there any change orders in the queue or just signed? Are there any out-of-scope costs that we should be tracking because we're expected to be on the hook for them? And finally, everyone's favorite, protocol amendments. Are there any in queue? Are there any recently signed? And what's the impact from them? So we understand why we need to have these discussions, but what's making it so hard today? And so a few examples listed out, very consistent with what we just saw on the previous slide. So first, ClinOps is swamped, and that's because they're at the front line of these trials, working to get those patients enrolled. These could be patients that are in desperate need of an alternative treatment or just any treatment in general, and then ultimately pushing the enrollment for their trial, pushing it through the phase, and ultimately with the goal, ideally, to go to market. Also, the information may not be living in one place. There could be multiple trackers floating around, either through Teams, email, and ultimately at risk for version control, or not even in trackers. It could be living in ClinOps' head. You could have Chris from ClinOps who knows that 10 patients have enrolled and they're communicating that to you. But then to point number 3, what does that mean in dollars? And this was called out as one of the biggest pain points across the board. So you might be getting the information, understanding enrollment and discontinuation, screenings to date, but what does that mean with the amount of money that we owe at this point in the trial? I have a customer who's an example of all 3 of these. There's one main clinical ops person staffed on their team. She is all over the world visiting these sites as they're activating for her trial, and she doesn't have any time to get back to the controller with his questions, but he can't access the site contracts to understand. He knows that there's 20 patients screened, but what does he owe because of that? So ultimately trying to make sure that we're making everyone happy, getting their information, and also still allowing ClinOps to focus on their patient-centric work.
Maddie, I'll add in one other point here, just sort of same nuance of ClinOps being swamped. I think we've also seen the other side of this where finance and accounting teams are really swamped, and as a result, don't necessarily have the capacity to actually understand all of the more technical clinical nuances of the study. What's the schedule of events that patients need to go through? How does that actually impact the financial element of it? What are the potential invoiceables that could occur? And so without the ability to kind of tie all of that together, that kind of means that they need to rely on the ClinOps folks even more than they might have before.
Yeah, it definitely goes both ways. Awesome. And we've arrived at another poll.
Perfect. So I think for this one, would love to get everyone's input on this. What has worked for you when it comes to collaborating cross-functionally? And we're excited to open this up as a poll just because I think we have on our end seen a lot of different things that have worked. So would love to see your experience. And if you do have an anecdote to share or nuances around what size company organization you come from and why this method worked for you, that would be great to toss into the chat as well. Centralized data tracking is definitely a big one. So we'll talk a little bit more about that.
Okay. Seeing a variety, ad hoc meetings coming up, read aheads and prepared materials. And give a little more time before we go through what we've seen too. Okay, a little different, some rigid, structured agendas. Awesome. So it makes sense. That's what we've seen consistently across the board for our customers too. And can go into the next slide here. So as we've called out in the beginning, we work with over 65 biotechs with a variety of structures on their teams, and we're engaging with the different stakeholders at each. And I wanted to come prepared to this meeting with a recommendation of best practices that we're seeing consistently work across the board. But from talking to my customers, it became very clear very quickly that there is no single set of best practices for engaging cross-functionally. Probably not a big surprise when we think about what clinical trials look like, since they're nuanced themselves and configuration and tracking for them looks different across the board as well. So does the engagement across the teams. So breaking that out into two different main spectrums here is the meeting cadence, which can vary from weekly to monthly to quarterly, and maybe some ad hoc, as we saw some people on this call today are doing, as well as the meeting structure. So it could be an informal discussion, just kind of hopping on a call as things come up, or to the right-hand side here of preparing specific materials beforehand to talk through. And thinking through some examples of successful meetings I've seen from customers. So starting all the way on the left-hand side, incorporating both weekly meeting cadence and an informal discussion. I have one customer who is early on in a phase 3 trial that they're going through multiple protocol amendments and currently still in negotiations. So they've actually paused enrolling patients. They have a bunch of patients who are screened and are ready to enroll, but aren't moving them forward because they have no idea what that schedule of assessment is going to look like, and they can't confidently have them start treatment yet. So they're meeting weekly with their ClinOps team to stay close to any updates here. Has anything changed? Has the protocol amendment progressed? Is there any cost being incurred as we're waiting for patients to start in the meantime? So they're meeting frequently, just hopping on the phone, discussing ad hoc as things come up. All the way on the on the right-hand side of this, I have a customer who is public with a phase 2 that's pretty simple. Not many protocol amendments expected, don't have to meet as frequently on a weekly or monthly basis, but they do need to meet quarterly to prep for their audit. So they actually have materials prepped beforehand with very specific asks to align across the team and ensure that they have full understanding of any change orders, any protocol amendments, what the enrollment looks like, to ensure that they're ready with completeness and accuracy for their audit. And then Kristen, I'm curious if you have any examples with your experience with customers.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll echo the kind of nuance that different customers, different cadences of meetings work for them. I have some folks who kind of have the quarterly meeting, some ad hoc. Have also seen scenarios where there'll be a meeting really on that monthly cadence that kind of aligns with the close process, so that there's sort of a single touch point with the ClinOps folks surrounding that close, as opposed to having sent a bunch of different emails and ad hoc meetings in that period. It's sort of centralized in that single meeting. I'll also add in, I know Chris put in the chat, having that dashboard in Excel on SharePoint that's maintained by ClinOps. Have seen a lot of folks actually build something like that out in collaboration with their ClinOps team up front at the beginning of the study. So say how do we want to get this data? What's the data that we need to be passed from ClinOps to the accounting team? What format can we get that data passed, and how can we make sure something's being updated on a regular basis? Either maintaining it within SharePoint, having kind of a live document, or passing something back and forth on a set cadence. Have seen those work in different scenarios.
Yeah, agreed. Awesome. Well, now switching into the next section here, connecting all of this then to the Auxilius tool.
Awesome. So I think that actually is a great transition, just this idea, as Chris put in the chat, as we were just talking about having kind of one centralized location to be able to track a lot of this information and be able to share it in kind of a consistent live mechanism throughout the study. So I think really quickly, as we mentioned earlier, I do want to touch on the Auxilius platform, who we are, kind of how we have seen different sponsors use the system to support with this cross-functional collaboration. Auxilius, high level, is the first to market clinical trial finance and accounting platform specifically built to manage the complexities of clinical trial budgeting, forecasting, and accruals, that close process. And what we're really good at is actually kind of piecing together the clinical side of things, the really funky, tough schedule of events that are in your oncology study or your rare disease study, actually pairing that up with the financial data so you can have that in one centralized location. And as we've spoken about before, we've worked with over 60 customers from biotech to big pharma, also across a wide range of therapeutic areas. I mentioned kind of the more complex oncology, rare diseases. We've done quite a lot of discussions kind of digging into some of the real tough financial nuances of some of those studies as well, all the way across kind of a wide range of therapeutic areas as well. So I think really what we want to talk about, as we have been talking about, is kind of prior to using Auxilius, what their processes look like, and then kind of the benefits of starting to use Auxilius for facilitating this collaboration. So if we jump to the next slide, I think, as I mentioned, and as we've mentioned throughout, before having Auxilius, a lot of like lengthy meetings. I think I mentioned instead of having kind of one centralized touch point throughout the month, we've seen a lot of customers have a lot of ad hoc communication and lots of email back and forth, losing all of this message within your inbox, and having to have a lot of different touch points to figure out really what's going on in the trial and how can we tie that back to dollars or whatever currency your study is in. Lots of prep, lots of work across both sides. And then really this idea of no single source of truth. Of course, as folks probably mentioned in the chat, there definitely are mechanisms within Excel that we've seen kind of maintaining that single source of truth, but I think it tends to be quite tricky. I've seen a lot of, I actually have a good example of a customer where the ClinOps teams have spent so much time building out their own trackers, maintaining data in that throughout the life cycle of the study, updating all the patient information, tracking all the vendors, the actuals that they're getting. Whereas finance and accounting have their own workbook that essentially does the exact same things, and no centralized collaboration across the two, despite all the hours and hours of work that goes into both of those. So really just a lot of challenges in that regard. And so I think transitioning then now with Auxilius, I think there's quite a few things that we have seen work really well with customers that have onboarded Auxilius to help facilitate with this cross-functional collaboration. So I think the first thing is using Auxilius as your source of truth. And as I just mentioned, not maintaining 2, 3, 10 different workbooks across different functional stakeholders, having one centralized location where ClinOps is inputting what's really going on in the study, and that's automatically being tied back to those dollars, and accounting can pop in and know which patients have enrolled in the study, what my forecast enrollment curve is, what actuals are for each of these vendors that ClinOps might know in more detail. Using Auxilius as a communication tool versus making extra decks and slides and presentation to communicate across teams. We'll jump in a few minutes into a demo of the system, and we can showcase some kind of key views that we've seen have been really helpful in actually sitting down in a meeting with different stakeholders and pulling up particular views that can be really helpful to actually see what happened in a given month, and go through a few different lines to be able to dig out those details and have one centralized view that actually is meaningful for both accounting folks and clinical folks. And then, of course, within that, making those adjustments and engaging in real time in the system, having both, of course, the finance and accounting folks who are using the system for their close, for FP&A processes as well, having ClinOps actively ingesting that data on an ongoing basis too, so that everything is kind of live updated. And I think just quick snapshot you can see on the left-hand side here. This is a snapshot of the type of information that we have within Auxilius, where you're seeing all of that patient information down to the kind of particular visit a patient's having, their cycle 2 day 15, actually tied back to the dollar amount. And that's really what we kind of excel at on the Auxilius side, actually pairing the clinical data back to the financial side of things.
Yeah, and I know for one customer I had, this was a game changer for their quarterly meetings that historically they prepped I think it was 20 slides long deck that was circulated throughout the team with different people inputting different pages. Again, version control scary. But they would pull up the in-month adjustments page to use instead. And then it took away any of the prep time that went into those quarterly meetings. So it was really just that 45 minutes a month to get on the call, go through everything. And then not only that, beforehand, they were looking at those vendor provided estimates and kind of just guessing if it looked right, doing a gut check. But now they had a digital data point to compare to feel like they actually had something to benchmark versus totally guessing in the dark.